police brutality.
A new community and
not only to end SARS or SWAT, they use when they say may they end this bad government.
WADR 94.9 FM.
WADR, promoting dialogue.
It's midday in Dakar and 1 o'clock in Cotonou. Good afternoon and many thanks for staying tuned to West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting on 94.9 FM and around the world on WADR.org. Welcome to Newslink, and here are the top stories. ECOWAS Parliamentary Diplomacy Mission urges calm in Senegal amid rising tensions. Authorities in Mali launched sovereign technology system to ensure national data. The University of Ghana survey says 40% of journalists experience attacks.
We asked journalists and what they think about the push trend towards the safety of journalists, whether, for instance, if we took the security services, did they consider this as a priority? Is the safety of journalists a big deal?
Nigerian government expresses worry following the spike in number of healthcare professionals seeking opportunities abroad.
Staff welfare and the salary, they should work on it.
In the Western world, doctors earn up to more than close to $15,000-$20,000. There are some that earn $4,000, $5,000, $6,000.
Please stay tuned for details of these stories and more.
Here is a more edit with Newslink.
Many thanks for joining us and a warm welcome to our listeners in the Gambia, Ghana and Liberia. This afternoon edition of the news begins in Senegal, here where an urgent appeal for calm and restraint has been made by the ECOWAS Parliamentary Diplomacy Mission. The mission calls on all political actors to refrain from employing any discourse that could potentially incite violence or escalate tension in the country. In a statement issued on Tuesday, the Parliamentary Diplomacy Mission insists that all stakeholders prioritize the fundamental interests of the state, emphasizing peace, stability, adherence to the Constitution, the rule of law, and social cohesion. Adolescent has the rest of the story.
Good morning to you in Dakar and from across West Africa and beyond. Welcome to West Africa Democracy Radio and broadcasting on 94.9 FM and online.
I would apologize for that wrong insert. We'll be bringing you that story in the course of the bulletin. In the meantime, the United Nations National Human Rights Commission expresses deep concern over the tense situation in Senegal after the suspension of the presidential election scheduled for 25th of February. Elizabeth Throssell, Media and Communications Officer for the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, conveyed through a media broadcast that they are troubled by reports of unnecessary and disproportionate use of force against protesters and constraints on civic space. The Commission calls upon the authorities to uphold Senegal's long-standing tradition of democracy and respect for human rights.
About the tense situation in Senegal following suspension of the presidential election that was slated for the 25th of February. Following reports of unnecessary and disproportionate use of force against protesters and restrictions on civic space, we call on the authorities to ensure that they uphold Senegal's long-held tradition of democracy and respect for human rights. At least 3 young men were killed during protests and at least 266 people have reportedly been arrested across the country, including journalists. We also urge all actors to refrain from resorting to violence. Given the challenges and concerns related to the circumstances surrounding the postponement of the election, UN High Commissioner for Human Rights Volker Turk calls on the government to ensure that the proposed national dialogue be as broad-based as possible and ensure genuine participation of opposition groups, women, youth and marginalised groups.
Elizabeth Throssell is the Media and Communications Officer for the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. Burkina Faso is set to receive 38.4 million euros or more than 25 billion CFA francs to boost food security. The financial support by the African Development Bank to the Sahelian country faced with insecurity and humanitarian crisis is intended to help it produce thousands of tons of cereals. David Vincent completes the story.
This funding from the African Development Bank is part of the emergency project to boost food production in Burkina Faso, which was launched on February 6. This is a lucid project for the Continental Financial Institution, which has identified the need to support Ouagadougou to boost agricultural production. The project will enable the production of nearly 9,000 tons of certified seed of varieties adapted to extreme climates and tens of thousands of tons of fertilizer to more than 330,000 farmers. These farmers, which include women, internally displaced persons and young people, most of whom have settled in the irrigated plains of Burkina Faso, will increase production in the country. A total of 430,000 tons of rice and more than 700,000 tons of maize are expected nationwide. Production of other crops will also increase in the coming years. The African Development Bank, through its country representative in Burkina Faso, Dan Ndoye, is committed to supporting the implementation of the project. This initiative to boost food production in the Sahel follows on the program launched by the authorities in Burkina Faso under the title Agropastoral and Fisheries Offensive 2023 to 2025.
David Vincent reporting there. Now let's take it back to the story in Senegal here, where an urgent appeal for calm and restraint has been made by the ECOWAS Parliamentary Diplomacy Mission. The mission calls on all political actors to refrain from employing any discourse that could potentially incite violence or escalate tensions in the country. In a statement issued on Tuesday, the Parliamentary Diplomacy Mission insists that all stakeholders prioritize the fundamental interests of the state, emphasizing peace, stability, adherence to the Constitution, the rule of law, and social cohesion. Here's a report by Abdullahi Hassan.
In its statement, the Parliamentary Diplomacy Mission emphasized the critical need for all socio-political actors to promptly participate in an inclusive and fraternal political dialogue. This dialogue should involve relevant and interested political and social stakeholders aiming to reach consensual solutions and establish favorable conditions for the organization of open, credible, inclusive, and transparent presidential elections. The mission further urged the ECOWAS Commission to dispatch a joint delegation comprising representatives from both the ECOWAS Commission and the ECOWAS Parliament to Senegal as early as the following week. Their primary objective should be to facilitate the organization of a national political dialogue as an urgent matter. Concluding its mission, the ECOWAS Parliament's delegation reiterated its support for the people of Senegal and expressed the full readiness of the community's parliament to assist in the ongoing electoral process in the country. Having arrived in Dakar on Sunday, the ECOWAS mission engaged with various stakeholders including the Constitutional Council, political actors, parliamentary groups, and civil society organizations as part of its efforts to restore peace in the country. Senegal has witnessed a political unrest and a violent protest marked by the rescheduling of the presidential elections from February 25 to December 15. In response to the political crisis, former Senegalese heads of state Abdoulaye Wade and Abdou Diouf issued a call on Monday for political stakeholders and CSOs to engage in a dialogue to find a solution.
Abdullah and Father report.
More stories coming up on West Africa Democracy Radio. Newslink continues.
Let's cross over now to Mali, where the transition authorities are equipping the country with a new sovereign information technology system. Launched on Tuesday by Colonel Simi Goita, this new information technology has been developed by national experts to guarantee the country's digital independence. Called Mali Kura Biometrics, the high-level security platform will also be used to manage the civil status census databases. According to the state, the national data that will now be managed by Mali Kura Biometric was previously secured and supervised by Idemia, a French company. Idemia had blocked access to this data because of non-payment of invoices, an action the Malian authorities have described as database hostage taking. Meanwhile, magistrates' unions in Mali are expressing displeasure with a recent decision made by the Minister of the Civil Service regarding the enforcement of legal service hours. The autonomous magistrates and the Union Liberal Magistrate Sam and Silima jointly released a press statement vehemently refusing to comply with the minister's directive. They have said that this decision amounts to unwarranted interference by the executive in the affairs of the judiciary. Francis Boniface has more details in this report by WADR's Aliu Cham in Bamako.
In a joint press release issued on Tuesday, the Autonomous Magistrates and the Independent Magistrates Union expressed their displeasure and declared their refusal to adhere to the designated level service hours. This stance was prompted by a circular dated January 17, 2024, issued by the Minister of the Civil Service, affecting all civil servants in the country, including magistrates, a decision contested by the latter. The magistrates' unions, SAM and Silima, characterized the transmission of this letter to all magistrates as a blatant and unacceptable assault on the independence of the judiciary. They emphasized that magistrates are not subject to the general statute of the civil service and firmly reject any attempt to subject them to ministerial authority in this domain. The press release underscores that the administrative and internal organization of the courts is the exclusive responsibility of the heads of the courts and the public prosecutor's offices, under the sole control of the Superior Council of the Judiciary. Both unions stress the imperative to eliminate any confusion and uphold the separation of constitutional powers. They call for strict adherence to the Republican standards in the management of public affairs.
Francis Boniface voiced that report filed in by our Bamako correspondent Aliu Cham. In a related development in Liberia, judges are underscoring the detrimental impact of misinformation and rumors on the seamless dispensation of justice. They express concern that the unregulated use of both social media and traditional media has left the courts and judges vulnerable to public disrepute. WDR's Monrovia correspondent Darlington Popa reports.
During the official opening of the February term of court on Tuesday, Judge Roosevelt Willie emphasized the importance of seeking clarity from the courts before discussing legal matters in public, urging both the media and the general public to adhere to this practice.
We therefore make a clarion call to all concerned to make use of this fundamental right and reach out to the court for information on cases they want to get clarity on based on the facts and the circumstances. Additionally, they will help against some of the misinformation and disinformation usually circulated against the judiciary, particularly some judges and magistrates who have sacrificially worked so hard to earn their reputation.
Councillor Swahilo Sese, representing the Ministry of Justice, reminded the judges to constantly uphold their independence and ensure fair dispensation.
When a judge falls short of the ethical standard expected of our esteemed profession, it is imperative that accountability and consequences be swift and unambiguous.
Chief Justice Sianeyo took the opportunity to advise judges who frequently request substantial support from the national government to approach their duties with honesty and avoid politicizing the operations of the courts.
You all are not babies to be crying every day. Bring something to the table also. If you want raise in salaries, they got the laws as regards who makes salaries, who promulgates salaries for judges. The judiciary branch of government is not clothed with that authority.
The Chief Justice has pledged to collaborate with the national government to enhance the welfare of judges in the country. For Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio, I'm Darlington Popa in Monrovia.
You're listening to Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio 94.9 FM Dakar. Here's a reminder of our top stories. ECOWAS parliamentary diplomacy mission urges calm in Senegal amid rising tensions. Authorities in Mali launched sovereign technology system to secure national data. Still ahead, the University of Ghana survey says 40% of journalists experience attack. Nigerian government expresses worry following the spike in number of healthcare professionals seeking opportunities abroad. We also have the press review, the guest interview segment, and sports brief. Please stay with us.
You are listening to West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting from Dakar, Senegal.
Don't forget to stream me live on WADR.org, YouTube, and Facebook. As the world celebrated radio on Tuesday, findings from the University of Ghana School of Communications 2023 survey are shedding light on the challenges faced by journalists. The survey reveals that approximately 40% of journalists have encountered attacks while carrying out their duties. More so, a significant 70% of practitioners are aware of colleagues who have fallen victim to such attacks. Dr. Abino Animwa Yeboah Banin, a senior lecturer at the Communications School, emphasized in an interview with local media that these incidents have instilled fear among journalists in the course of their responsibilities. From Accra, Nadide Tete reports.
Expressing concern over the escalating rate of attacks on journalists without effective measures to address the issue, Dr. Yeboah Benin highlighted the alarming trend where such attacks on media personalities have been doubling. Her remarks come in the wake of recent assault on journalists by politicians and their supporters.
At least some 38% of those who had been sampled had experienced attacks in the line of work. An even bigger number, nearly 70% of those sampled, said they were aware of colleagues who had experienced attacks in the line of work. Altogether, therefore, quite a good number of the journalists sampled expressed feelings of insecurity. They generally felt unsafe for doing the work of journalists in the country.
During the New Patriotic Party's parliamentary primaries, Mohammed Aminu Al-Labira, a local media correspondent in the northern region, was reportedly attacked by Farouk Aliu Mahama, the Member of Parliament for the Yendi constituency. Dr. Yeboah Benin pointed out that journalists lack confidence in the security operatives.
We asked journalists and what they think about the posturing towards the safety of journalists, whether, for instance, if we took the security services, did they consider this as a priority? Is the safety of journalists a big deal to them? About 65% of the journalists said, no, we don't think so.
In another incident, individuals suspected to be supporters of Mavis Hawakumson, the MP for Ewusu East constituency, are accused of assaulting a journalist in the central region. As a response, the Ghana Journalists Association called for a media blackout on the two legislators. Information Minister Kojo Nkrumah supported these calls and urged the GJA to intensify pressure on the Ghana Police Service and the judiciary to effectively address cases of attacks on journalists in the country.
Nadia Tete reporting there from Accra. Meanwhile, the National Commission on Small Arms and Light Weapons in Ghana has revealed that around 1.1 million small arms and light weapons within the country cannot be adequately traced or documented. This staggering number of unaccounted for weapons out of a total of 2.3 million currently circulating poses a grave threat to national security, according to the Commission. Frank Boateng Asumani, the head of the National Arms Marking Program at the Commission, highlighted ongoing endeavors to mitigate the proliferation of these arms during a regional conference addressing the humanitarian impact of improvised anti-personnel mines. The trend of healthcare professionals, particularly doctors, pharmacists, and nurses, leaving Nigeria for opportunities abroad has been steadily rising. This mass migration has resulted in a doctor-patient ratio that exceeds 5 times the recommendations of the World Health Organization, WHO. Reporting from Nigeria's capital, Abuja, WDR's Manama reveals that over the past 2 years, more than 500 health workers have departed from the National Hospital, Abuja.
Nigeria is undeniably grappling with a significant annual loss of hundreds of healthcare workers due to the phenomenon of brain drain. At the National Hospital of Nigeria in Abuja, a facility that attracts patients from all corners of the country, Mahmoud Raji, the chief medical director, revealed to journalists that over the past 2 years, more than 500 members of their workforce have departed in pursuit of better opportunities abroad. The consequence of this trend is an alarming shortage of healthcare professionals with an impending threat of even more departing. Martha, not her real name, a healthcare worker with about a decade of experience at the National Hospital in Abuja, is among the remaining staff contemplating a move to a foreign facility with more promising prospects.
I enjoy doing my work, but there is a big but there. Majority of us working here now, we are not happy. I'm not blaming our CMD for anything, but there is a big but there.
Accompanied by relatives of patients, Martha and others attribute the exodus to underpayment and poor working conditions. These factors, they agree, are driving healthcare professionals to seek employment opportunities abroad.
Had it been that well paid, there's no point leaving their own country for another country. Nigeria is a very beautiful place too.
Staff welfare, then the salary. They should work on it.
In the Western world, doctors earn up to more than close to $15,000-$20,000. There are some that earn $4,000, $5,000, $6,000.
With the situation escalating, experts emphasize the urgent need for measures to reverse this trend before it spirals out of control. For Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio, Usman Umar reporting from Abuja.
This is the newspaper review. Stay on top of the news. Get the most important stories with added insight and concise review.
This is the newspaper review.
Well, let's join Sankle Janko in Banjul for the newspaper review.
Hello there, and welcome to this press review, where we take a look at the major newspapers and the major headlines in the Gambia. Let's begin with the Fourier newspaper. And the lead story on the Fourier newspaper today reads, Farmers in Opanyomi says GGC still owing them. GGC is the Gambia groundnut production company. They are responsible for purchasing groundnut from farmers at the end of every farming season. And farmers in this region claim that the government still owe them. A work minister unhappy with progress of Bundung highway construction. For the past 8 months, constructions began on this road. But as you heard there, the works minister, that is Ibrahim Silla, is not happy. 2 witnesses testify in women's visa hookup trial. That's another story on the Fourier newspaper. Let's move on to the Standard newspaper. Quite an interesting lead headline today, and it reads, Is Jammeh FTJ reconciliation imminent? We're referring to the former president of the Republic of the Gambia, and that is Yahya Jammeh. The question that the Standard newspaper is asking is whether the reconciliation between the former President Jammeh and the current Speaker of the National Assembly, and that is Fabakary Tombong Jatta, whether their reconciliation is imminent. Well, it's a question mark. That's the lead story. We'll follow up on that development and see how things panned out between these two very prominent Gambian politicians. This one reads, NPP lowers Combo East Nam after he dumps UDP. Interesting. The Combo East National Assembly member, So, has decided to dump the opposition UDP and to join the ruling National People's Party of President Adama Barrow. Actually, he's a National Assembly member and he got election through the UDP ticket, and that is the opposition UDP ticket. But now he has decided to resign from that party to join President Barrow's NPP. UDP rep urges president to stop attacking Barrow. That is Alhaji Dabo. He is a member of the United Democratic Party and a National Assembly member for Brikama North. He has urged the Gambian leader to stop attacking their party leader and opposition leader, and that is lawyer Usainu Dabo. Fonyi National Assembly member introduces bill to repeal anti-FGM law. Amnesty asks Senegal to probe killing police brutality. Let's move on to the Point newspaper. The lead story on the Point newspaper reads, Gambian allegedly killed by Senegalese force to be buried today. The photo of Almami Jiba, the National Assembly member for Fonyi Councillor, where this particular Gambian who have been allegedly killed by the Senegalese soldiers hail from. Court overrules Defense Council objection in health official corruption case. And once again, this one also reads, Combo East National Assembly member resigns from UDP. Now, finally, let's take a look at the Voice newspaper. And the Voice newspaper's lead story today reads, Halifa enjoins Gambians to take stake in preserving national stability. And Barrow is making efforts over draft constitution to leave behind legacy. That's according to Madi Sise, the National Assembly member for Serekunda. Although he's in the opposition leaders' camp, but he's honest enough to praise Barrow to say that he is making efforts to have a new constitution in order to have a legacy. These, I'm afraid, are the major stories making headlines on Gambian dailies. I am Sankule Janko, and it's back to you in the studio.
Indeed, many thanks, Sankule, there with a newspaper review.
Politics, Analysis on major news, social matters, and all. This is A Guest.
In this edition of our guest interview, we feature a veteran broadcast journalist, Marcel Tomasi, who reflects on the existence of radio as a means of information dissemination for a century. Recall 13th of February every year is celebrated as World Radio Day. Tomasi speaks about how radio has stood the test of time and its effectiveness in delivering information.
Those countries, particularly in West Africa, like Nigeria, Ghana, Senegal, Sierra Leone, they were far much ahead of radio broadcasting in the Gambia, which actually started officially in 1962. Okay, maybe 100 years, but those countries were far ahead of the Gambia actually in the sub-region, really.
It's still more than 50 years ago in the Gambia then.
About 60s now.
Yes.
About the 60s.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Was there any, should we call it knowledge transfer from, let's say, the neighboring countries? For example, in the case of Gambia, would be looking principally at Senegal, perhaps. How much of a role did radio in Senegal, being like some would say the big brother of the Gambia, play? And also remembering that at some point it was also the same country.
You must remember, Senegal is a French-speaking country and the Gambia is an English-speaking country. So most of our social structures are derived from the former colonial masters, really. And if I may say so, we inherited different structures from Senegal, actually, and they had very little impact in the early days of the introduction of broadcasting in the Gambia, really. We were more English-speaking, and some of our producers, announcers in the local languages underwent some attachment training in Senegal, for example. But that's why it stopped, huh?
You know, it's interesting when you of course distinguish the fact that Senegal is a French-speaking country. It was under French rule, and Gambia had a different path with the British. It's also interesting to look at the fact that when you look at the earliest records of radio broadcasts, it looks clearly like it was a means of colonial administration also. How did this play out? What was the role of radio at this particular time?
Basically, radio broadcasting, at least in the Gambia, emerged principally as a public relations office of the British government, actually. I mean, we got our radio station, as I say, in May 1962. Gambia was
before
not
independence.
Actually. Yeah, that's long before independence. And then radio broadcasting was introduced mainly by the British government, who actually sent their British advisors here on broadcasting. You know, I remember we had two. We had Tony Cox, then we had Don Diamond, who I'm more familiar with because when I was introduced to radio broadcasting in the Gambia, he was the broadcasting advisor to the directorate. Now, okay, you talk about inform, educate, entertain. I mean, I don't know about the French slogan, but I learned that as principally a British slogan. And all radio stations now pick up inform, educate, entertain.
That was Marcel Tomasi, a veteran broadcast journalist. Well, you can get the rest of the interview on our website on WADR.org. And in sports news, President Bola Tinubu of Nigeria has conferred national awards on members of the order on the Niger MON on all the players and the officials for their performances in the Africa Cup of Nations, AFCON. The Super Eagles won silver medal after their 2-1 defeat to host new champions Cote d'Ivoire. The president of NFF, Alhaji Ibrahim Musa Guzau, and NFF General Secretary Dr. Mohamed Sanusi also received awards. In addition to the national awards, all the 25 players and the officials have each been given a flat in the Federal Capital Territory, Abuja, as well as a plot of land, each also in the Federal Capital Territory. And we've come to the end of this edition of Newslink from West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting from Dakar, Senegal. Thank you for listening, and many thanks to Christian Mukudi and Maudo Ju for the technical assistance. Let's continue the conversation on our social media platforms, X, formerly Twitter, Instagram, WADR News. Coming up at the bottom of the hour is the flagship gender program 50/50. I am Imo Edit. Good afternoon.
And many thanks to you for listening to Newslink via Hot 104.3 FM, Newmi FM 94.0, and Veritas Radio 102.9 in Banjul, the Gambia. We also appreciate our listeners in Liberia via Alternative Youth Radio 98.9 FM, Lofa County. For you listening via Radio Pad 95.1 Damango, Savannah region, and on Royals FM 104.7 Wenchi, Ghana, we say a big thank you. Remember, West Africa Democracy Radio is all about you, your views, and your opinions.